Hello. So this is the third video in the series where I'm going to be summarizing the lectures that I'm doing in class. I've had a thought about the way I'm doing these videos, and a couple of things I've been thinking as I've recorded them is the word summary probably isn't a good description of what these are going to be. They're more like supplementary material to explain what I think are very key concepts. And what I decided to do with this video is rather than have it just about the third lecture, I'm going to have it about lecture 3 and 4, because I think there's ideas in those two lectures that are very close together, and so it makes sense to do this in one video. So what it's going to be about today is I'm going to talk about the main difference between a website and a web application, and then we're going to make a web application using PHP and forms, which is roughly what we talk about in lecture 3 and 4. So let's get going. Now, in the last video, we looked at HTML, and I could write a HTML file and stick it on my web server, and that would be a static website. If you browse to it in a web browser, being the client, this web browser would make a request to the server would look on the file system and find the HTML file you have requested and just send it back to the client, and that would render, and that's a static website. Now, to make an application, we need interactivity. So static websites just are for presenting data to you. And this came from something called the Common Gateway Interface, which was a way where a web browser would make a request to the server, and the server would then run an application, and that would generate HTML, which would then be given to the web server to give to the client. And there'd be data would go along here, variables that would be read by the CGI application. They'd usually be like system variables or just from standard input-output. And that would generate the HTML, dynamic HTML, so you've got a dynamic web application. Now, over time, this has changed, and the way it works now is that we have, as part of the server software, is a language interpreter, which interprets some kind of like PHP or something that comes from the browser, well, that's on the file system. It interprets that code, generates the HTML, and then that gets sent back to the browser. And we also have client-side scripting like JavaScript, which is happening in the browser itself. And this web service we can also talk to external web services. But the key difference between what I would call a website and a web application is a website is static. It's like reading a book. The pages don't change. You've got lots of nice links to different areas in the book, but it's just static. And that's what the web was designed for. It was a manual for a project in CERN that was constantly changing, and they needed to be able to update this documentation basically, and that's where the web came from. It wasn't designed to be a dynamic application. It wasn't supposed to be dynamic. And so all this has been added over the years, which has changed the web into what it is today. And this course is all about web application development, so that's what we're going to be doing. So I want to start by actually running through building a simple application with you today. Now, we're going to be using PHP, which means that I'm going to need a web server for this to work. So I'm using WAMP server, which you can download for free. And once you've got it running, if you left click on it, you'll have a directory called www directory, and left click on that. And this is basically your server directory, like the root of your server. So if you put files in here, you'll be able to browse to it when this is running, and it will all work. The server which is running will interpret the PHP, and it will run correctly. When I'm using this myself, I usually make some project folders. So I'm going to make a folder, simple application, which is simple app. And in there, I'm going to, actually, I use Sublime. So I'm going to use Sublime. Spoilers. Okay, so let's do a new file. Let's save this as, I'll save it in simple app. It's going to be a PHP file. So we'll call it, let's do index.php, because it's going to be, this is like the home page where I want the application to browse to. So let's start by making our HTML. So doc type HTML. I love Sublime Text. We don't need that. So what we're going to be doing is making a calculator. So calculator. Let's just leave this as it is, and I want to show you that this server's working. So if I click here and then localhost, that will open a browser up and navigate to my local host. And then I've got simple app. If I click that, I think I might need to do right. I've had this problem actually. So it's localhost simple. Right, so that's worked. So what happened before? For some reason, this used to work. I don't know when at some point this changed and it doesn't work anymore. But you need to make sure you're going to the localhost simple app. So you can see we haven't got anything here at the moment, but we could. Let's do. Let's make a div. And let's make a paragraph. Actually, no, we'll have a heading. And just call it calculator. There we go. And refresh this, we've got calculator. A little trick when you're using Chrome, at least, I'm sure there's ways of doing this in other browsers, but if I've opened up the developer tools, and if I go to settings, there is a thing somewhere, disable cache while DevTools is open. This is something I leave on, and then I always make sure I have this open, because sometimes your browser will cache things, and when you update your HTML and then refresh this, it won't work. So what I want to do is build a simple calculator where you type in two numbers and you select from, we'll just do plus and minus, and you select whether you want those numbers added together or not, or subtracted, and then it gives you the answer, right? Super simple, but something you couldn't do just with a static HTML. To do that, we're going to be using HTML forms, which are incredibly important and like a really big deal with everything that you're going to be doing making applications. It's a key way of getting user input, basically. So it's pretty simple to set up. So we start with just a form, and I'm going to put a few attributes in that I'm going to explain a bit later. So method is going to be get, and action is going to be index.php. Oh, no. Do you know how I said I love Sublime Text? Well, we're going to end that form, and then we're going to have input type is going to be, let's not bother giving it a type. Let's just give it a name. We're going to call it v1. This is going to be our value 1. Save that, refresh. So we've got a text box, and I can type in whatever I want here. So I can type in 1. Now, if I typed in 1, I pushed enter, and look at what happened to the URL. It's added that data to the URL. So we've got a question mark, v1, which is the name of this input, and then it says equal 1. I could do 2, 3, 4. And this is called a get parameter. And the data I enter into this box is ending up in my bar here. And then what we can do is, using PHP, we can look and we can use this data. You've probably seen this if you go to YouTube and we click on any video, and we can see we've got YouTube, watch, and then there's this parameter here, the question mark, v equals, and then there's this code. And that code refers to this video. So every video has a unique code, and that's how this is working. And we can see that because it's encoded in this get parameter. Okay, so let's add some more things to our form. So we're going to have our v1, and we're going to have input v2. And then I'm going to put a submit button in. Input. This one I'm going to have type submit, name equals submit, and then value equals submit. Also, I forgot to close all these tags. Let's just have a look at this for now. So we have this submit button. So we can just push enter, and the enter will submit it. And notice how it's given the value submit here. Like submit is a parameter. And we've also got several get parameters here now. We've got v1 equals 1, v2 equals 2, and then submit equals submit. Okay, so we've got, and they're separated by the ampersand here, and they're all name pair values. So we've got a name and a value. So we're starting to build our calculator up here. So let's do the next one. Now the next one, I want a drop-down list, and I want to be able to, the user to be able to select whether they want to add these things, add v1 and v2, or subtract. So select name equals action, because that's going to be the action that they're performing. Option, and then it's going to be value equals plus, and then it's going to be plus. So the inner HTML there is what the user's going to see, or what you're going to see in the browser. So we're going to have this minus, like that. I've saved it. So there we've got a plus and minus here. So if I do that, 5 minus 5, click submit. Notice now we've got the action equals minus. So we can use that now. We'll be able to use that with our PHP. So yeah, so that's the basics of a form. Now, something I just want to mention here are these attributes. The first one is the method we want this form to be submitted. So when we click submit, what's actually happening is we click submit, and the browser is making a HTTP request with this form data appended to it. And in this case, the form data is going into the URL itself, and that's what get is referring to. See if we can see that on here. If we go to timeline, or network? Yeah. So we've got a see, this is quite nice, again, with Chrome developer tools. Are quite nice because we can see here that we clicked, there's a method get. Can I click on this? Yes. Okay, right. So this is the actual HTTP request that was made. So the request that was made is our full URL that's got these get parameters in there. And it says request method was get, and the status was okay, we got it. Yeah, so that's it. Now what we can do is we can go back here and we can say post. And do the same thing, 5 submit. Actually no, we need to, let's go to index.php, 5 + 5 submit. Now notice there's nothing in the URL. But if we look here, we've got method is post. So in this case, the method of this request was a post method. And it's requesting that URL, request method post. But here is the form data. It's not in the URL, it's actually been submitted as part of the request. And this is something to bear in mind, is that when you're using GET requests, all of the data is going to be easily visible in your URL, whereas using POST, it's going to be part of the request. Now you can see that, look, I've actually just easily clicked Developer Tools and I can see this data really easily. So don't think that just because you're using POST that this data is secure somehow. What it is important for, though, is if you've got lots of data you're sending up, you don't want a massive, great long URL, really. You want it to be, it doesn't make sense to have lots of, if you're adding a Pokemon to a Pokemon database, for example, you wouldn't want to have the list of all the different parameters and values and descriptions of the Pokemon in your URL, right? You'd use a post in, you do it this way. If you were, for example, on this Pokemon database and you want to see Pokemon 5 out of your list, then that would make sense to put it in the URL using a get, because all you've got is you'd have something like question mark ID equals 5, and that would go, that would send the request, and then your server, whatever language you're using, would say, right, okay, it's number 5 they're looking for, would look for that in a database and return that to you. And that's why it's actually called get, is because it's meant for getting. It's meant for, like on YouTube, that's exactly what YouTube is doing, is it's using get parameters to get the correct video. Yeah, you don't, when you upload a video or upload something, it doesn't go into the, it doesn't get encoded into like a URL. Because that would be crazy. There's also limits to the size of URLs, which is the other thing to consider. Right, so we're going to put this back to get for now. And now we're going to write some PHP code in here to show you. Now, this video is not going to be an introduction to PHP. I will go through that in lectures, and also if you are just watching this video and you are on my course, then I'd go somewhere else to look for PHP. But we're going to be doing pretty simple stuff here, so I'll go through it. The first thing to do is I want to check to see if the user has actually submitted something. Now, HTML is quite interesting in that there isn't really a concept of state. When you put a request, the client does a request to the browser, there's no real way of knowing if this is the first request or second request or whatever. Like, you've got to check that in your code somehow, and that might be done through using like session cookies and stuff, or it might be done the way I'm about to do it, which is I'm going to check and see if, when I click submit, let's just change this, and if I click if I click submit, there's this thing here that says submit equals submit So I'm going to check and see if that value has been set. So if is set, and what we can do in PHP is I can do the get parameter, which has the name submit. And so what this is doing, this is much better than using CGI, which is the old way of doing it. Most of your code is devoted to passing this string and getting out the variables, whereas PHP and kind of modern ways of doing it, you don't need to do that. It's all done for you. So you just do get submit. I'm looking for the get parameter that is submit. So if it's submit, I'm going to just read the variables to be clear. So v1 equals get v1, v2 equals get v2, and then we need to decide, are we going to be adding these together or are we going to be subtracting them? So if our get, we called it action, didn't we? Action equals plus, then we're going to do something else. We're going to do something else. So we're going to do result equals v1 plus v2, and then if not, then the result equals v1 minus v2. So if it's an add, we're adding. If it's a subtract, we're subtracting. Now something else I want to do as well is I want to actually return some HTML. So this is part of the application. When this runs, I can do echo and I can return some HTML here. So I'm going to put this whole thing into a new paragraph. And actually, I'm going to put this in a paragraph as well. Probably don't really need to do it, but I could put it in a div as well, but I'm just going to do this for now. Right, so echo, I'm going to do echo v1 plus v2, and if it's a negative, I'm going to do echo v1 minus v2. I might have to put this into a string actually, so otherwise it will just do that operation, I think. And then I'm going to echo the result. So echo, in fact, actually, I've done something stupid here. Do this. Right. Echo equals result. So what I've done is I'm building the HTML that's going to appear in all this echo is going to appear in this PHP section here. So let's see if this works. 1 plus 2. Okay, so we've got 1 plus 2. I need a space there. 1 plus 2 equals 3. And let's do 3 minus 1. 3 minus 1 equals 2. Now what's quite... So there we go. So immediately there we've got a simple application that now we can interact with. And this is kind of the basic idea. If you get this, like everything else is just a complication on this process in a way. Like you might be doing some interaction that has some database you're doing something with. But it all comes back to this idea that we have a HTML page. There's going to be a form almost certainly, or there might just be some links that link to certain things, and you can put some data in the links that will, sometimes you don't need to do the form, because you could actually make a URL that has these get parameters in a link. For example, when we do .NET, there'll be things called action links which do this kind of stuff. So we'll have some kind of form or interactive bit in our HTML. When we submit that data, then there'll be some code that runs on the server, and depending on the input, it prints out HTML. Right, that's all we're doing here, we're printing HTML. We could quite easily, let's say we want this to be a bit more bold. Let's do 1+2. There we go. So now it's got this tag in there. So yeah, so let's have a look at something I want to show you. Developer tools. Let's go to elements. Now notice in here we can't see the PHP, right? The PHP that is at the bottom here isn't in the source that's sent to the browser, which is really useful because we can put stuff in there, and we can run code on our PHP and the user doesn't see it. If you're using client-side languages like JavaScript, they will be able to see it. Yeah, because the JavaScript is just going to be there on their computer, on the client's computer, running from there. Okay, so that's a basic application. One more thing. So this action attribute, this is where we want this form to be submitted, what page. So index.php is the page that we're at. So it's taking this and it's doing a HTTP request to that URL. Okay, we could quite happily have that URL anything we wanted. We could even have it as a URL that isn't actually our website. For example, I could do form method get action, let's say http www.google.com and form input type, we're not going to have that, but we're going to have Q here. Let's do a refresh here, search. Okay, and what that did was that the action was Google, so it did search to Google, and I happen to know that the parameter Q means search, so we could go to another website, and that can be a security problem, because someone could make a form and set the action to your website and fool someone into filling out their form thinking they're filling it out for your website, and maybe get you to do crazy things like send them money. So that's something we need to always think about when we're doing any kind of web development, is that this data could be coming from any old where. So yeah. Right, the other thing is we can set this to post, and this, well, let's go back to index. So I've set my form method to post. So 3 + 3 doesn't do anything because we're looking for get parameters down here. So if we do a find and replace get with post, replace, do refresh, and we'll do 3 + 3. Okay, so now yeah, the request is doing a post, and this, the index.php, we've now coded that to be able to deal with a post request, and that's how that works. Hopefully that was clear and quite a simple little introduction to the idea behind what a web application is and how we can write a simple one using PHP. As always, any questions, let me know. Follow me on Twitter at Dr. Sean Walton. Subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. I'll take requests for videos. I do read comments, and I'm writing a list of suggestions. I've had one so far, so it's not a very long list, but still a list. Obviously, priority goes to people on my course. But, you know, if anyone wants to suggest stuff, if I've got time, I will make videos and answer questions. Thanks for watching.